The whole concept behind doing a scenario dynamics grid is to give the reader, the subscriber, a sense of how we disaggregate the process. So we're not just talking about the onset of protests or jumping right to the conclusion, the punchline, or jumping right to downstream implications. Instead, we disaggregate it, we take that seemingly rapid, out of control event, and we try to stretch it out across phases. So in terms of the model, we start with the unfolding of the protests. Do they flare up and flame out? Are they crushed? How sustained are they? That sort of stuff. Then we go to the regime response. Do they capitulate right off? Does the military step forward? Is it a series of missteps by the government in the form of Mubarak? Then we go to the U.S. response as the key patron in the region. Is it fast? Is it slow? Does it side with the people? Is it indecisive? Then we move to the regional response. Does the contagion spread? Do we see effective firewalling? Do we see support from fellow autocrats? That sort of thing. Then we pull it back even further to the global response. How much of it is shock? How much of it is an adjusted sense of perspective? How much of it is support for the spontaneous seeming revolution? Then we look for tipping points, or sort of the iconic image that defines how this thing starts moving towards some sort of glide path. And that's the last phase we look at, the exit glide path. What kind of situation does this remind us of? And so we use historical analogies there. And the whole process is to give you a sense of this is how it's starting. This is how it can unfold. We're not wedded to any one path. It can jump between paths. Combinations, of course, are allowed, because we're interested in tracking reality, not capturing some sort of model. And the real focus is giving you a sense as to where this goes in terms of those glide paths, what would be the long-term potential horizontal aftershocks internally, regionally, globally, in terms of important relationships. Basically, we look at it in terms of speed and who wins. You could talk about the regime winning, or you can talk about the people winning. And either side can win fast or slow. So one track, for example, is sort of the fast win on the side of the public. The protests explode. They create a kind of a scared, capitulating response from the government. Everybody's with the netizens and everybody else coming together in this kind of social virally sort of way. The response in terms of the region is one of shock but delight. And then the potential there is that it's going so fast that maybe you're looking at a question of a positive situation gone wrong. So we raise the specter of Iran 1979. Kind of too fast, too wild, too out of control. Who benefits in that sort of situation? And there, most of your fears center around the Muslim Brotherhood. Kind of a slower win for the people is the protests drag out. It's kind of a steady drip, that's what we call it. The regime tries a crackdown, can't manage it. There's a certain amount of bandwagoning, a certain coalescing, and we see that around Mohammed el-Baradei. There gets to be this persistent chant from the global community, let my people go. And the hope there is that some key actor, either the patron in terms of the United States, Mubarak himself comes to the conclusion, or the military steps in, and you get sort of what we call a pacted transition, maybe internationally negotiated, and you're on the glide path looking more like Turkey now. Islamist flavored regime, but not dominated by any Islamic group. Military, kind of a staunch behind-the-scenes operator and supporter of the whole thing, and a decided approach towards modernization and opening up to the global economy. The two slow losses, or the regime wins, we could describe them, or the slow and fast loss on the regime side. You get a persistent, systematic crackdown by the regime. It's successful, probably just on the part of the police alone. It buys time. It promises, the leadership, Mubarak in this instance, promises to kind of accelerate the China model, throws as many ministers at the public as possible, tries to create that sense of momentum. Obviously that didn't happen this time. The fast win for the regime is the military steps forward, and obviously you got some sort of military dictatorship. More concern there about the kind of Pakistan path. So kind of fast win, the concerns, are we looking at Iran 1979? Fast win for the public, out of control revolution. Slower win for the public, more like a Turkey sort of outcome nowadays. Slower win for the regime, sort of revivification of the China model. So looking maybe China post-Tiananmen in 1989, and the kind of fast win, so-called, for the regime, the kind of military junta or something coming in rapidly, and there your concern is something along the lines of Pakistan. I think we've seen a combination basically of kind of the slower popular win with the military coming in at the right moment, choosing sides, making it clear to Mubarak that he has to step down. And so, and we saw it in terms of the voting. Most of our subscribers, readers, really looking for that Turkey outcome. And we think that's the most likely and most logical. Good way to track how these things kind of jumped around. The U.S. response, at first kind of vaguely with the people, always for Facebook, always for Twitter, always kind of vaguely for that kind of people revolt from below. But officially, a lot of siding with Mubarak. That was very unpopular, a little too much hand-wringing and indecisiveness. Now very much trying to catch up, identify itself with al-Baradei, identify itself with the anti-Mubarak movement, and very much focusing on pushing for an accelerated outcome here. But by and large, we look at this package in terms of how it's unfolded. Minimal violence, strong signal sent, strong signal received by the autocrat, the promise for now to step down, the desire to stay in power until the scheduled elections happen in the fall. And we look at that and we see a lot of hope in that path, because there is the potential for enough outside players, inside players, to get involved, to work this thing out in that pacted transition where everybody gets sort of a slice of the pie and you get the freest possible election down the road. And we would think that would be the best possible path in many ways for Egypt if it was legitimizing in terms of the public, if you got a strong, stable, credentialized role for the military throughout, because they are large and very powerful, and that would be very reassuring to neighbors, especially to Israel, perhaps also to Saudi Arabia, definitely to the United States. And you get the kind of most legitimizing, potentially opening up sort of outcome down the road, which is, by our estimates, in everybody's best interest, obviously not Iran's, for example, but in most people's best interest, that we see an Egypt that begins to globalize itself much more rapidly in response to the clear demands put forward by the public that more job opportunity, more connectivity, more investment, more everything in terms of economic development be accelerated. Once you get that scenario dynamics grid and you get that sense of how the protests can unfold and how the kind of initial wave of change can happen, then the whole process of kind of mapping out the implications switches to horizontal aftershocks. And there we're really looking for a sense as to how this can play out over the mid and longer term. So we look at it from a variety of levels. We look at it from the inside. We look at it regionally. We look at it globally. We look at its impact in terms of relationships with key powers. And we look at it in terms of how it changes kind of our overall net assessment of the region. Internally, we looked at a variety of scenarios. Obviously, there's the fear of kind of an immediate loss of connectivity. Stuff stops moving. Goods stop coming out of Egypt. Stuff stops being imported, most notably grains. Money stops happening. Tourism stops happening. You see just a general loss of connectivity, and you see kind of a slowdown, paralysis of the economic situation. Longer that goes on, more damage, obviously, to the economy. This is a fairly high-performing economy, considered one of the emerging economies of the frontier variety last couple of years, with a very bright future. So the more this can be minimized, better for whatever post-Mubarak regime emerges. Certain amount of fear over the loss of military control, memories of Iran 1979, tens of billions of dollars of hardware there, who knows what else. People bring up the gas canisters fired on the crowd, made in the USA, apocryphal symbolic image, but the bigger concerns are, does the military lose control over weaponry, hardware, again, or worse? And into whose hands do such assets fall? Not, I think, a big possibility. We don't look at it like that, but that's a concern that people have, and obviously that's what drives a lot of this kind of who lost Egypt fear that we see kind of circulating throughout the system. There's always the potential that as Mubarak holds on, in whatever form he holds on, whether it's benign or increasingly malevolent, that's yet to be determined. Is there an isolation of Egypt that proceeds along Mubarak becoming sort of the next Saddam? Is the regime demonized? Is it sanctioned? Those sorts of things. And in that process, or in any of these processes, what is the potential for the radicalization of society in terms of Islamic fervor? Or does this remain largely an economically focused kind of revolution/revolt? We would argue that the revolution, social economic, is really already well underway, and what we're looking at is its political expression in terms of a revolt. But that can always segue into larger social economic revolution, again, the specter of Iran. When we kind of pull that lens back and get it to the level of the region, the bigger questions, obviously, question of contagion. Prime candidates, we see Jordan, King Abdullah firing the cabinet very preemptively. So obviously he got the signal. The question of does it spread to Yemen, which is simmering in terms of a north-south split that's been there all along, reflecting the past split state status. Obviously it's become a big network for Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. By extension, can there be backdoor entry into the Gulf Emirates and to even Saudi Arabia, which by and large is described by most analysts, Wikistrat included, as being relatively stable. Question whether it can spread to Syria. Less possibility we see there. Obviously, there's a lot of concern it spreads to the rest of North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Libya. All different cases, no easy, quick analogies to be offered, but obviously these are the big concerns in terms of the region. Pull it back to the global realm, then we're looking at things like how much does it influence the commodities markets, energy markets, security premium already being seen in terms of oil. Concerns because Egypt is a major grain importer. Concerns globally, the loss of military hardware in the direction of the Muslim Brotherhood seems like a fantastic scenario. Obviously worst case from today's perspective, and yet people have memories going back to Iran, and there's a lot of concern there. Clearly, Mubarak played a strong role in terms of the counterterrorism network that developed after 9/11. Is there going to be a hole in that network now? Are we going to see more smuggling into Gaza, for example? Looking long term, do we see a shift of the center of gravity from the long war? Had been in Iraq in the mid-2000s, then shifts up to Afghanistan, Pakistan. Does it now get pulled down into Egypt or North Africa more vividly because of this potential situation for civil strife in Egypt? Or is that door shut even that much more firmly, and we see radical Islam diminish throughout the region because this was an obvious target of Al-Qaeda and nothing really comes about? So you're looking at the possibility of kind of a revivification of the radical Islamic impulse in the region, or potentially, if it goes down the Turkey path, a flooding and opening of the floodgates with regard to globalization connectivity, and in effect a tremendous victory for the forces of connectivity, markets, democracy, and those sorts of things. So a lot hanging in the balance, and that's what we tried to capture in these various scenarios.